Hey, it's Ed. I've got a few new podcast supporters I want to thank. Sean Sharp, Emily Boulder, Melissa Daruna, Tyler Scott, Susanne Orn, and Matthew Hessler. All these folks signed up to support the podcast via Patreon. So if you're interested in learning more about how that works, go to mountainandprairie.com/support. Big thanks to everybody who supports the podcast, and big thanks to everybody who's been kind enough to leave reviews on Apple Podcast. It definitely makes a big difference in the long run, so thank you very much. Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation, or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Chris Burkard. Chris is a world-renowned photographer, filmmaker, and storyteller whose work captures the beauty and rawness of some of the Earth's wildest places. Whether documenting iconic climbs in Yosemite or frigid surf trips deep in the Arctic Circle, Chris has established himself as a committed artist who's willing to suffer extensively to get the perfect shot. And because of his love and respect for these wild places, Chris is also a committed conservationist, using his artistic skills to showcase the importance of endangered places and affect positive policy changes. Born and raised on the central coast of California, Chris spent much of his youth exploring the mountains and coastline of his home state. During high school, he fell in love with photography and eventually left college to pursue it as a full-time career. After several years of working to establish himself in the business, Chris's commitment and hard work paid off. He's now one of the most sought-after photographers for a wide range of clients, from corporations like Apple to independent publications such as Surfer's Journal or Modern Huntsman. Chris's career is a testament to the power of hard work, positivity, boundless energy, and laser-like focus. I've been a fan of Chris's for years, so it was a real pleasure to have the chance to chat with him. We both took breaks from our respective quarantines and kid wrangling duties to meet up via Skype for a fun and wide-ranging conversation. The specifics of Chris's photography career have been documented extensively in audio and print, so I wanted to learn more about what makes Chris tick. Specifically, why does he choose to suffer in dangerous environments? How are he and his wife ingraining grit in their two sons? And how does he manage to muster positivity during tough times? We also talked a lot about his commitment to conservation, as well as his commitment to working with smaller, independent outdoor publications. As usual, we talk about favorite books, favorite places in the West, and Chris offers some timely words of wisdom. Links to everything are in the episode notes. A huge thanks to Chris for taking the time to chat during such a crazy time. I hope you all enjoy this conversation as much as I did. It's a much-needed burst of energy and optimism during this challenging time. Years ago, I watched your TED Talk, and I loved it. And there was a quote in there that has stuck with me for years and years and years. I've watched a lot of TED Talks, and they kind of blend together over time. But yours and the specific quote I loved, and it was, "Pain is a shortcut to mindfulness." And I thought that was such a powerful statement. So I thought maybe we just start out with you talking about that quote and talking about how pain, both physical and mental, has informed your photography and storytelling career.
Man, that's a great question. I'm stoked you led with that too, because, the reason that I was so drawn to that idea was I studied for a short period of time. And when I say studied, I mean, like I read a couple articles and I ruminated on my own experience. But there was a psychologist named, I think it's Brock Bastian, he was from Australia, and he did these studies about pain and about how, and not so much like pain, like, I'm getting injured, but like, internal pain, mental pain, duress, right? About how these experiences, we seem to favor them more. Mm-hmm. And although that might seem like, it's terrible human nature to dwell on the negative, it's not so much about that. It's about the fact that if you're in a group with a group of people and you go through a traumatic experience, your bond with those people is tighter. If you go through you go through an experience with a group of people and you experience hardship, or it's more challenging. It doesn't even have to be unenjoyable. It could just be hard. You remember it. And it was so interesting because they did these beautiful blind tests where they actually took subjects and they gave them like a scent in water or something like that. Mm-hmm. And the ones who had undergone traumatic experience or whatever, or who had just previous to that endured like some sort of trauma, they were able to pick it up. Why? Because when you are in those states of hardship, you all your senses are more alert. You are more aware. You are a more fully functioning human being, you could say, or more fully present human being, right? Mm-hmm. And I always relate it to this idea of like when you keen a bird, like a raptor, right? You know, oftentimes when they send a raptor out to go hunt, you know, they have a little hood on it. Why? Why would they not allow it to see anything, not feed it for a couple days or a couple hours? Because they're keening it. And that process basically means that they're taking something away from it, so that when that hood is removed, there is a singular focus. That bird is ready to go hunt, right? It's not thinking about anything else. And I just think that what pain does for us is it really brings us into the moment. Everything else washes away. There's no need to worry about, you know, what's happening tomorrow, the next day, what happened 10 minutes ago. You're immediately immersed in that. And I feel like for me, when photography presents a challenge, or when life presents a challenge or a struggle, I revel in those moments. That's when I feel the most alive.
When you think back on your experiences and your adventures all over the world, was there an exact moment or an exact adventure where you had that realization and you were like, all right, like it's never in the moment, but let's say when you got home and you look back and you're like, all right, that was special? Or was it more of a general process over years and years and years where you just you got to appreciate it more and more over time?
It was slow, like any growth, you know. It's like trying to watch a dew form on a bush. You know, you know it's going to form overnight, but you cannot watch it and see that dew form. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things where, that growth happens super slowly. And I think if anything, I was transitioning in my life, in my career, going from surfing and shooting in cold, warm water places for the magazine. And obviously, if you've seen my TED Talk, or if anybody out there wants to learn more about my process, like the TED Talk really lays it out. So I won't bore anybody with that backstory. But ultimately, like, I was transitioning from basically shooting in these tropical places and feeling very unfulfilled, to going and seeking out colder locations. And one of the places that I settled upon was Norway, the Lofoten Islands, shooting surfing in the Arctic Circle, freezing cold, snow on the beach and ice blocks and whatnot. And ultimately shooting in the water, me as a photographer filming and shooting in the water, photographing these surfers, it just presented such unique challenges. And obviously I endured my own, battles with hypothermia and frostbite and whatnot. And I realized just the amount of time and dedication I was willing to give to those places was unlike anything else. Like, imagine going somewhere where you're like, yeah, I love what I do and I work hard. And then all of a sudden you're somewhere where you're like, this is everything. Like, I'm finding purpose. I'm finding more than just photographs. I'm finding purpose here. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it was in those moments where I was willing to literally freeze my ass off.
Yep.
To capture a moment that I was like, what is it about this that is giving me this desire to work so hard? And I think that it was within those experiences, going to Alaska, the Faroes, Iceland, Norway. It was a cumulative experience that really led me there. But there was a couple where I was in the water and it was like blizzarding and I couldn't feel my fingers, and started kind of getting onset of hypothermia where you start to get really stupid, basically, making dumb decisions. I'm crawling my way back to shore, and I'm, my friend's helping me out of the water, and I just have a smile on my face, even though I can't feel my lips. It was kind of one of those. So
when you were a kid, were there any experiences, whether it was in athletics or just, adventures, camping or whatever, where you can look back and say, all right, I can see where this came from? Like, I had a bit of a taste for it as a kid, whether it was through endurance sports or surfing or whatever, or was it something that developed later in your life, once you kind of started pursuing this career of storytelling?
Oh, man. Good question, man. It's funny because I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but I didn't grow up living this life. I grew up in a single parent home, my mom, me, food stamps, right? The whole deal. I didn't own a passport. My greatest adventures were going up the coast to Big Sur or driving to Yosemite or the Eastern Sierras, the furthest I had ever traveled until I got on a plane and went to Dubai and Yemen and Oman for a story for a magazine. Literally the first trip. The furthest I had traveled was to Yellowstone National Park. So my world, the scope of my world was national parks and these places. And granted, those are insane. I'm so lucky. I had Utah, I had California, everything. But my experience growing up was really focused on time in the mountains, time at the ocean, and sort of these close to home wild places. And I really learned to appreciate them because that was as big as my world was, right?
Yeah.
And I think that if anything, what I kind of realized, and this sort of ties back to the reasoning of why I transitioned from, and in my TED Talk, I say this, I had the dream job. I was, sitting on this warm beach, tropical beach, shooting surfers for the magazine. Could life get any better? And I realized that sucked. I was truly living a lie. I was trying to sell adventure when there was none to be had. I was shooting photographs in these places where, the only connection you had to nature was with Wi-Fi. You know what I mean? It was basically on the backside of some big, massive hotel or resort and, fine dining experience and whatnot. And you're trying to create images that sell the illusion of adventure. So I had to take a long, hard look at myself and be like, what am I missing? Oh, I'm missing that experience of going up the coast with friends and hopping over a barbed wire fence and going and surfing some sharky wave that you just felt exhilarated being there and or going into an unknown slot canyon in Zion. I needed that. And so I think that those early experiences, and I was an Eagle Scout. That was a big part of my upbringing. Not having a dad, Scouts provided a lot of my early childhood, boyhood experiences, going out and doing 50-mile backpacking trips and whatnot, and just learning to be self-sufficient. So I felt like I needed a stronger connection to the outdoors. I needed, much like anybody who goes out for their first backpacking trip, their first hunting experience, whatever that is, you find self-sufficiency. And when you don't have self-sufficiency in your work and you don't have a sense of I'm earning this, or I feel like there tends to be a void created. And that's what I felt.
So, given your upbringing, I'm sure you are sick of this question, but I'm going to ask you just to give context for folks who may not be as familiar with your work as I am. When was the first time that a camera entered your hand? I mean, how did that become a part of the story?
Can I just ask one question of you? Where are you from? Because you have the best drawl I've ever heard.
And it's toned down, man. It's toned down.
Soothing. I just want you to kind of read me a bedtime story.
Maybe I should start a meditation app. No,
dude. I mean, seriously, it's good. I'm like, oh man, this is good. I'm
from Tarboro, North Carolina. I'm sure you've been there on one of your adventure trips, right? The mighty Tar River.
One of the gals that works for me at my studio, she's from North Carolina. So
cool.
Definitely got some appreciation for that
nice.
area. Great question. So my upbringing in photography was I had a great grandma who was a photographer. My aunt was a photographer, but that wasn't really I was around cameras, but it wasn't really something that dawned on me as interesting. I didn't care. In high school, I was ditching auto shop class to go surf with friends, to the point where I pretty much had to I forewent a scholarship to go to Wyotech, which was a really prestigious automotive specialty school. And I'm only telling you that because I kind of had this path that I was taking. This sort of I was going on this one path, and I decided to completely switch paths and adjust and do something else. And ultimately, basically what happened was surfing kind of took over, and wanting to sort of, go explore. And I guess, during the time I was doing a lot of art in high school. I was drawing and I was painting and I loved it, but I realized really quickly, like, dude, I don't want to be stuck on a hillside with an easel while my friends are out, like, in the water. And when I picked up a camera, I was at my girlfriend at the time, now wife, her mom handed me her old camera because she was digging through stuff. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. And I took it out with me when I went out with my friends. And I realized, much like any young boy trying to find his place in the world amongst friends, amongst peers, amongst other boys, my sort of place within this group of dudes, right, was like documentarian. Like I this was an art form, but it was different than painting. It was different than illustration. I could take it into the mountains, into the ocean. I felt fully complete with it. And it was so special to me that I fully embraced it. And I think what happened was I graduated high school at 19. I was going to junior college, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to quit school. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to give photography 5 years. And if I am face down in the dirt somewhere, fine. But if I am thriving, then great. I'll at least know that I gave it a shot. And that's exactly what I did.
And what did your mom think when you announced that?
Oh my gosh, dude. My mom was so pissed. I mean, granted, like I was a smart kid. Like I had, straight A's, 4.2, whatever. I was the only kid in my family who had the opportunity to go to college. So I really let her down. I'm not going to lie. Like she supported me in everything I did. She is my hero. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But to be honest, like she really wanted me to have a backup plan. And this was the first moment in my whole life that I was like, I'm doing my own thing. And you got to keep in mind, like my mom, when I say she's my hero, I really mean it. Like everything I've done is to make her proud to this day. Makes me emotional just talking about it. But ultimately, like I didn't want to let her down. So I had a lot of internal struggle, a lot of self-worth issues, a lot of things going into that being like, I mean, fuck, I'm going to make something of myself. Like I have to, or else this is not going to be worth it. And I'm just going to have blown the greatest opportunity in my life, because I had financial aid, I had scholarships, I had opportunities to go to school that was paid for, but I gave that up to pursue this selfish career at the time. And I just really, I really was grateful that they gave me the support that they did, even though that caused a lot of strife in our relationship.
One thing that I find so interesting about you is so admirable is your optimism and how positive you are. And in any interview you hear, there's just this upbeat, positive energy. But then there's also this drive you have to, do a good job and to work as hard as you can. And it seems like sometimes with that, when somebody has drive like that, they can be a kind of crotchety because they're working really hard for a reason that may not be, on the surface for everybody to see. So, I mean, would you say that you're optimistic and positive? Is that your hardwiring, or have you had to kind of force yourself to do that over time? Because I've had a lot of people in this podcast who are positive and optimistic, but it's a choice they've made. It may not be hardwired. And in a way, I'm like that. I mean, it's a choice I've had to make.
Positivity is 100%. It's a choice. Like you are never going to just become a positive person. And I would honestly say that positivity is typically born out of hardship. Mm-hmm. That's just my perspective. I don't have any other way of putting it, but the fact that like you need to know what it's like to have to suffer, to have to sacrifice, to appreciate the good times. I mean, in my life, in my career, and again, I don't want to get too into the weeds here. I don't really like telling sob stories about like, oh man, I struggled, but like, yeah, I appreciate so much the years and years of like putting my head down into the wind and just grinding, like picking pennies off the floor of my Toyota Tacoma to buy Del Taco so that I could survive, I am grateful for those times, because I think that those make me look at now. I'm like, I have a freaking roof over my head. I just ate like some Whole Foods,
yeah.
I know what it's like to have to like suffer. And I'll tell you what, there's a lot. Here's really what it is. And sometimes I'm not great at articulating things, but so much of what I do, so much of what we all do, when we put ourselves in these hard situations, whether you're in the mountains, whether you're in the ocean, it's completely elective suffering. So if you cannot be there and be like, oh my gosh, like I'm, hunkering down in a storm in the mountains. Yeah, it's scary. Yeah, you might die. Yeah. But guess what? You chose to be there.
Yeah.
So the only choice you can do is really in that moment is, do I smile and laugh through this and realize that like, hey, this is just a manifestation of what I deem to be fun and exciting. Yeah. And I think that in the grand scheme of things, the things to me that are really serious are like, trying to raise kids properly and trying to, tell people you love them and trying to deal with the emotional strain on relationships. Like that's the stuff that keeps me up at night and scares me. It's not about, being in some ice storm somewhere and I just try to keep that perspective. So I feel like in some ways, yeah, I'm a serious person for sure. But when it comes to like taking a moment to reflect on like how I got myself into some stupid, hard situation, all I can do is laugh. All I can do is smile. Like I can't look at it any other way, because there are people forced in to some really hard places in life. And I've been in those places and crawled my way out. And I just feel like, man, this is better than it could have been.
Well, you mentioned your kids, and I've got younger kids. I think you're a few years ahead of me in the whole fatherhood game.
Nice. But what do you got?
I got 2 girls, 2 and 4. How old are yours?
Oh, nice. I got a 5 and a 7-year-old, soon to be 6 and 8, and it's crazy.
It's so crazy, but it's so awesome, and I don't know what I did or thought about before they were born. And so, one question that I think about a lot is that I want, when I think about my girls, I want them to be tough. And I want them to be compassionate. And I feel like with your background, some of this elective suffering that you choose, but then you had some suffering that you didn't choose, just circumstances. And that caused you to have this grittiness that has served you very, very well. So when you think about your kids that are growing up in a completely different environment, and I ask this selfishly because I need the answer for myself. How are you cultivating grit in them? I mean, how do you do that? Because
such a great question. Have you ever read that book Grit by is it Monica Duckworth or is it, I can't remember the name.
Yeah, Duckworth is, and I have not. It's on my shelf. I need to read it.
Great book, and that's a good question. I think that that grit is so. Such an interesting thing. And I think it's hard to articulate. You're like, grit, what does that mean? Like, does that mean you drag your kids through, on the ground and like force them into hard situations? I think what it means is that you create a personality and a character trait of perseverance. You prioritize it. And I think the way in which I do that personally is like, I make my kids finish what they start.
Yeah.
And that is just maybe a lesson from, to be honest, Boy Scouts, like straight up. Like that was the one really cool thing about, again, like scouting. And I'm not here to advocate for BSA or anything like that. There's a multitude of other like types of awesome programs that teach youngsters that stuff. But that was the one thing for me that I was super grateful for is I'm like, you know what? This is rad that there's something out there that is teaching me or giving me the opportunity to say, hey, you finish something, you start it, and I think that's the mentality I take through, even with my kids. Like, hey, we're starting this hike, we're finishing this hike, boys. You're starting this art project, you're finishing it, and just learning that you need to become a man or a woman, or whatever you call yourself, of your word, right? Mm-hmm. And what does that mean? Well, that means that you're gonna be somebody that if you tell somebody you're going to do something, that you do it. And that can be as simple as like if my boys tell me like, hey, I'm going to finish this food, I'm like, cool, I'm going to hold you to it, or I'm going to finish this thing. Or if we make a deal, like I don't give them that slack and that way out, because that's the hard thing is I see a lot of kids out there. I have a lot of friends that have grown up with a different mentality. Like, it's okay if you don't finish this. It's okay if you don't finish that. And I think that might be a short-sighted way of looking at life, but you end up seeing a lifetime of projects and opportunities that never fully are realized. And I think that if there's one thing that I struggle with the most, it is seeing people not completely live up to their potential.
Yeah.
That is a truly great struggle that I just, it just kills me inside. And I've seen so many kids who were maybe, grew up with a silver spoon or were given more opportunity. And, to be honest, there's nothing wrong with being blessed with opportunity. Mm-hmm. But if that's not fully realized or if that's not fully acted upon, I think that is one of the greatest travesties in life,
Is that a fear? Is that a fear that has driven you? Because that drives me, definitely. And like my hero is Theodore Roosevelt. And one of the reasons he's my hero is because he was born this rich kid. He didn't have to do a damn thing. And yet he kept his foot on the gas and went as hard as he could and lived up to his potential, which included all the opportunity he was blessed with. I mean, is that a 100%. Thought that goes through your head?
You're spot on. I mean, really, like that's the thing is like I'm not going to lie. Like my kids are growing up with a lot more privilege than I ever was blessed with, which I've worked everything I can to provide that for them. So I know. But that being said, one of the key things here, sorry, my kids are right outside the door here.
No, you're good, man. I know how it goes.
I can hear them with their chickens. One of the things is that, I've worked so hard to provide that for them. And I do have that crazy fear to be like, crap, now that we do, now that we can, again, provide these awesome opportunities and take them on great trips and let them travel and let them, how do I still instill in them the perseverance, the grit, the attitude of starting and finishing, all of those things, it's so important to me.
Correct me if you disagree with me on this, but I feel like the outdoors in general, an outdoor adventure, it's a real clear, streamlined way to learn these lessons about finishing what you start, do what's important, because you get immediate feedback. Like if you go to bed with wet clothes on, you're going to wake up freezing cold and maybe get hypothermia. And so you can't, there's nowhere you can procrastinate. And like I did NOLS during college, National Outdoor Leadership School.
Awesome.
And, similar thing to what you were saying with Boy Scouts. And it's just, and so, I mean, is that going to be a big part of your fatherhood plan is getting them outdoors?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, like that is one of the beauties of fostering outdoor experiences is the fact that like when you put it into the hands of your kids, when you sort of, you give them the keys to the car, right? You're saying, hey, everything you take in this backpack, like this is your food, this is what you're eating for the next day, the overnighter, the whatever. It forces them and allows them to make the decision, right? And then you kind of hold them to that decision. And I think like with anything, there is a bit more immediate results than like, the long-term college plan.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're like, okay, well, you have this budget. Here's how you got to spend it. They learn really quickly that, oh my gosh, okay, so if I don't, if I don't bring the right stuff or if I don't whatever, or if I don't suffer now, I'm not going to be able to, if I don't suffer a little bit now, I'm going to suffer a lot later, and that might be kind of a hard analogy to kind of break down, but ultimately the point is that kids can fully be self-sustained, self-learning little humans, and sometimes we don't need to like pound in these lessons into their head, right? I think that's one of the concepts that I've really tried to avoid. And if anything, I've tried to help them understand that like they are so much stronger, they are so much more capable than what they think, and I guess if anything, that's the message I'm trying to drive into them is like, you're capable, you can do this, you can do anything you put your mind to. And I'm going to set an example that hopefully can allow them to do that.
Yeah, I think the example thing is huge because you could be saying you could give them the exact correct prescription of how to live this perfect life. But if you're not role modeling it, it's all worthless. At least that's my thoughts.
Right. Totally. 100%.
Thinking about your career and having kids, you've been in some crazy situations, and
there have been a couple moments for sure. I'm not gonna lie.
And so when the first little boy arrived on the scene, did that change your tolerance for risk at all?
Yes. This is a good question, and something that has come up a few times is like, how has parenting changed your approach to risk? And I would say that, it's a funny one, because I think that risk is a topic that needs to be addressed in just a couple of ways. One of them being that everybody's tolerance for risk is different. I made a film about surfing in the Arctic, under an Arctic sky, and in that film we get caught in this crazy storm, right? Biggest storm in 50 years in Iceland. And I think one of the things is that in touring that film, I realized people were like, oh man, how does your wife feel about you being there? And I'm like, you know what? She wasn't worried, because that was my 30th trip to Iceland. Mm-hmm. And I only say that because I want people to understand, like, my tolerance for risk over time changed. It evolved. It got different and stronger and bigger and whatever, what have you. It didn't start out where I was like, you know what, I'm going to thrust myself into this dangerous situation and scare my family and all these things. That wasn't how it started, right? So over time, that tolerance became more and more and more. And I think that the reality is I would have never, ever done those things that happened on that trip on my first time. Mm-hmm. Now, that being said, I think that risk is directly related to experience. It's directly related to how much sort of time you dedicate to the places and the things that you care about doing, So again, if rock climbing is something that you love and you spend, a quarter of the time in your life doing it, then you're going to be, pretty well measured in terms of like what situations you're putting yourself in. And then at that point, if something goes wrong, it's something going wrong out of the ordinary. Do you know what I mean? And that's the thing. Like I'm lucky enough, I take the risk of driving my car on the freeway. I've luckily never been in an accident before, knock on wood, big time. Right. So I don't assume that as being any more risk than anything else. When it comes to me going out and maybe doing something completely new, mm-hmm. This is really where I think the question of risk comes in. If we're talking about, me backcountry skiing, me, going again, surfing, me doing this and that, like there is a certain aptitude for these things that I feel comfortable with. But if I'm going to go out and learn to paraglide, that's a conversation that I'm going to have with my wife. That's a conversation that I'm going to have internally. Why? Why am I taking that on? Why do I feel the need at 34 to bring that into my life, right? Mm-hmm. That element of risk, because that's what that presents. And I think that, to me, I hate to have this long-winded answer, but I just feel like in general, there is a need for self-reflection when it comes to being a dad. Yep. And putting yourself into risky situations, and ultimately realizing that when you have dependents, kids, you have a mortgage, you have all these things, it's a real challenge mm-hmm. to justify certain activities and things like that. But I grew up in a family where my dad, it was so hard because my dad, my stepdad, came into my life when I was about 12, 13 years old. Yeah. All I would ever hear is like, at the end of the day, he would see somebody doing something risky. I'd show him a YouTube video and he'd be like, oh man, that guy doesn't have to pay a mortgage, and I grew up with that. And I'm like, is it possible to still have that ability to like, to do things that are fun, things that are risky, things that are exciting, and provide for your family and be a reliable husband and whatnot? And so I guess I've kind of taken this middle road. Like I want to show my kids that you can have great, grand adventures close to home, that you can still go out and do things that scare you, that scare the crap out of you at times while still being safe. And a big part of that is, who are you doing it with? Yep. Who's showing you the way? And for me, one thing that I've really prioritized, the people that I spend my time with when it comes to these sports, these activities, these whatever, they're oftentimes professionals, or they're people who have a lifetime of knowledge. Right. Yep. And what else? What am I doing beyond that? Well, I'm listening. I'm listening to them. I'm taking the time to really digest what they're saying and respect them. And that's one big thing too. Is if I was gonna go out and learn to paraglide, which I'm only using that example because I've thought about it, you can bet that I'm gonna do it with the most efficient, smartest person out there that I can find, or the person that I trust, right? And not to get like spiritual in any capacity here, but I think it merits explaining that, like, I think that prayer and personal reflection, however you decide to call it, that's a part of my process. That's a part of understanding, like, okay, do I feel comfortable about this? Am I taking this in? I mean, I can't express enough that I feel very much like I have been protected in many situations that could have gone really south because of the fact that I think just being aware of the spiritual sort of side of myself and listening to whether you want to call it a still small voice or your own intentions or guidance from the divine. I don't really care. Yeah. But that has served me well because I have learned to listen and I've tried to apply those things in my life.
Do you cultivate mindfulness in any way? I mean, do you obviously work on the physical side of things and you train and you're in awesome shape and you have to be doing what you do. But is there a training that goes into the mental aspect of some of the stress the stress that comes with running your own business, first of all, but then the stress of being out there, that's hard enough. And then you're throwing on top of it, possibly getting hypothermia and skiing off of mountains and all that kind of stuff. I mean, how do you ensure that you're where you need to be mentally?
That's a great question, and one thing I'll say to answer that, it's kind of maybe this story will sort of help. By the way, again, noise in the background. I'm so sorry. I'm at my house in quarantine. I think there's some people outside mowing a lawn.
Dude, first of all, it's podcast and it's my podcast. And so we can do whatever we want. And that's super completely cool.
I think people are more flexible now because it's
hell yeah.
It's like podcast on quarantine. It's like there's kids screaming, it's like, it's so hard to be like, hey, everybody in the house, be quiet. I'm going to talk to somebody for an hour. So no, I appreciate that. But yeah, I was just going to say, I think that with that question, the best way I can really describe it to you is to say, I had this experience that last year where I was training for an ultra distance bike ride. I got into endurance cycling just because it was, it sounds super dumb, but
I get it.
I think I
do ultra running, so I understand the nuttiness.
Badass. Yeah. No, I've always wanted to get into that. I've only done one ultra run, which was basically a 50-mile sort of run hike through Yosemite.
Oh, and, wow.
It was awesome, dude. If you ever want to go out there and do something like that, it was one of the greatest experiences of my life.
Cool.
Yeah, but it'd be really fun. But it being said, I got into ultra cycling because of the fact that I wanted a way to be in the outdoors more, be in the outdoors longer. Like that's all it really is to me. I don't care about riding bikes. I barely know anything about bikes. I'm honestly like people ask me about gearing and I'm like, I don't know. I just put one leg after the other and go. So when I say, yeah, I love to do this because it provides me this moving meditation that I can do for hours, I really truly mean it. But that being said, I guess in many ways, one of the great lessons that I was able to glean from training for this ultra endurance ride that I wanted to do, it was a ride I did in Iceland. It was like 850 miles. Whatever. And basically what ended up happening was I realized that, yes, training for the mileage, that was going to be hard. It was going to be challenging, right? But nothing I could do, no situation I could put myself in, nothing at all could train me for the mental stress of what I was about to endure. Yep. And I just... what I'm saying is that I'm this kid from California. I'm going to be going over there doing this mega bike ride. It's gonna push me to my very edge of what's possible. But the problem is, I can get my legs and my butt and all my bike ready. But how am I going to deal with the stress of going out there and doing this and basically not having to deal with the weather or the wind or the lack of sleep or the food. So what I did to prepare for that ride was I focused my training on the mental stress. And what I mean by that is I would wake up at midnight and I'd be like, I'm going to ride my bike for 24 hours without sleeping. And I would go through that. And then I would be like, you know what? I just ate a crappy meal. I feel super sick. I'm probably going to crap my pants. I'm going to go ride my bike. Why? Because guess what? In the middle of the ride, when I've got GI distress, because this happens and you know all about that, I'm sure, is like, I need to be able to cope with that. Like it's not a very complicated, it's not a very complicated thing, right? It's just the fact that you're trying to add stress into your life to basically compensate for the fact that you're not going to be able to train like that normally. There's no training plan that's going to say this. So I guess what I'm getting at here is the fact that if you want to foster an environment where you're ready for the rigors of life, you're ready for the rigors of a job, you need to prepare, right? Mm-hmm. And how you prepare, really, I mean, everybody chooses a different way to do it. For me, it was paramount to be like, you know what? I need to try to fabricate these stressful experiences so that when I get out there, when I get into the mountains, into whatever, I'm ready. I feel confident. I've done everything that I physically can, and I am ready to go. And I think that really served me well. I won the race. It was awesome. It was an absolutely transformative experience that I can't say enough good stuff about. And all I really want to add is the fact that, like, you know, it taught me so much about myself. And I think that what I also have applied to my life is I did the yoga teacher training years ago. Mm-hmm. I'm not a yoga teacher by any means, but I did a teacher training, and I did that because I wanted to learn more about yoga practice personally. Yep. And one of the things that I did take on in that training was I took on a course in meditation, and the meditation course was incredibly valuable to me. It taught me an absolutely crap ton about just being able to breathe and being able to kind of let situations go, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess point being here is, like, there is a number of ways to deal with stress and to deal with the stresses of daily life. And if anything I've found to be of benefit to me, it's this idea that the more situations you can prepare for mentally, the less scary they'll be when they come. And even right now, in the midst of COVID-19, which I know, you know, we both joked like that we're not going to talk about. I have gone to great lengths to recession-proof my business. And what I mean by that is that years ago, you know, back in 2008, when I was doing exactly what I'm doing now, which is photography, you know, there was crazy stressful times. And in that moment, I realized, like, you know what, I'm going to have to figure out a way to protect myself, protect my business. So I guess in many ways, when this, you know, pandemic, all this stuff is happening, I don't think I'm as scared as I would have been had I not had the foresight or the forethought into protecting myself or protecting oneself, right? And that's, I think, what I'm getting at is, like, it's the only thing we can do. You know, we have to kind of figure out ways to build out, fortify our minds, fortify our bodies, and everything else. Again, I chase around professional athletes for a living at times. It's really hard when I'm sedentary, sitting behind the computer screen. So for me, spending an hour a day training, whether that's cycling, whether it's running, whether it's whatever, it's not an if, it's a must. I have to do that because it's one of the only ways in which I know I can stay ready for the demands of my job. Mm-hmm. Right. It would be unfair to my family if I didn't do that, because then I would get hurt. But here's the hardest thing. And as a dad, you're a dad, I'm a dad. There's a lot of dads and moms and whatnot out there. Like, I just want to tell you one thing. If you don't take that time, it might seem selfish. You're taking this time away from your family. And I don't care if you're a professional rollerblader or you race horses or you hunt for a living. If you don't take that time to mentally and physically prepare yourself for the rigors of whatever your job is, it is more selfish not to take that time than to do so and then get injured or get set back doing that.
Yep. I completely agree with all that. I mean, I think, you've got the physical toughness is one part and then the mental toughness is another. But I think the secret ingredient, at least in my small set of experiences, and I think it shows in yours as well, is the positivity thrown on top and the optimism. And like when I've done some of these ultra races, I force myself to smile and I do not allow myself to complain because, there's always in these ultra races, people want to talk about how tired they are. It seems harmless. But I refuse to do it because I don't want it. And so I think that optimism, again, it can be learned, it can be forced. That's a huge component. At least it has been for me. One question I had, if people want to learn more about your photography and storytelling career, I mean, there's so many great resources from people that know so much more about photography than me. But one of the specific questions I did have about your work is, when I'm not doing this podcast, I work in land conservation, and it is my focus. You could easily be just producing photos for some of the biggest companies in the world, time after time after time, but you have made a conscious choice to have some of your photos benefit these conservation organizations, some in the American West and U.S. and some global, all over the world. When did that become a part of your career, or was there a specific point that you decided, all right, I can use my talents for greater good?
What a great question. To be honest, this is something that, I didn't set out with the intention ever to be like, well, I'm a conservation photographer, nor did I set out to even be a conservationist or an environmentalist at all. To be honest, I don't even know what that means.
Yes.
Because growing up, it was like, hey, I'm in fight or flight mode. I need to make a buck. I need to get stamps on my passport. It was selfish. My career was selfish. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. Mm-hmm. Nothing wrong. Right. Like, it is an absolutely noble cause to fly around the world, burn up carbon, and do so in the name of putting food on the table. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. If you're providing for your family, that's awesome. That's amazing. You're giving people a better life. Mm-hmm. Like, don't let anybody make you feel bad about that. Some of us make a living traveling. I think that for me, the reality was I started to travel at a fairly young age for my career. And I realized very quickly that the joy that these wild places gave me could only be returned by protecting them. Again, Yvon Chouinard, this is a full quote steal from him, but you can't spend enough time in these wild places without feeling a sense of responsibility for them, right? And that the reality was I felt that. I felt indebted to them. And I think that what my goal ended up being was, well, yes, I'm going to fly. I'm going to go around the world. I'm going to shoot jobs commercially and do what I can in this space. But if I can also bring awareness to the issues these places are facing and the joy that they bring me to preserve them for future generations, then I could actually do both things at once. And that was such a powerful and fulfilling thing. And the one thing I realized in the midst of all that was, the world. And when I say the world, that's like AKA, all the people that maybe listen to your podcast or follow me on Instagram or whatever. Yeah. The world wants you to care about everything. They want you to care about everything. Hey, guess what? Australia's burning down. The Amazon's burning down. There's oil drilling here. That's terrible. But guess what? We are human beings. We can only do one thing at once. And the reality, or care about one thing at once genuinely. Yep. So for me, I realized that I want to focus my efforts somewhere that makes a difference. I want to focus my efforts on one thing. And I've chosen throughout my life to really put myself in the middle of those battles. A big part of, I think, my goals in conservation have been to put myself in immersive projects where I can have a voice that means something and I could potentially change policy, not just talk about it, not just care about it, not just speak about how beautiful it is, but use it and advocate it in that way. And my latest project on Iceland's glacial rivers has been a 7-year initiative to advocate for these river systems and to speak about them from a place of deep understanding and knowledge, because I've spent the time to do so, and to understand. And I think that has been just an incredible eye-opening experience for me into what that means and to how the relationship with photographs and photography and conservation work, because it dawned on me at a certain moment that, wow, I had the most comprehensive photographic study of this place that, when put in front of Icelandic government, actually made a difference. I spoke at a conference that they asked me to speak at. This bright-eyed American kid who has no idea of the issues they're facing or of the complications or the intricacies of this country, and to all of a sudden be there and be like, well, what I'm saying, what I'm doing, what I have to offer can actually make a difference. That it struck me so deeply. And I feel like what I've realized is that I don't want to be the person that travels around the world and goes to new places all the time. I've tried to really hone my sights on going to just the places, just the locations that are meaningful, the ones that are significant, the ones that sort of mean something to me, and that I've been able to establish relationships with and establish a kinship to, I guess you could say. And that's what's really brought me back to Iceland, like 30 times or 40 times at this point. And the Faroes and other places. And that being said, you establish a relationship with these certain places and an emotional connection. And so I think that the point I'm trying to get at with the long-winded explanation, which, I'm sorry, to me, politics and conservation and photography, it's a big issue that I talk about a lot. And
definitely.
A big, complicated one. But here's the deal. Like, what it boils down to is that I were never going to be able to tell kids in rural Africa or China of the importance of glaciers in the hopes that they're going to protect them. We could talk till our nose bleed, but people aren't going to care about what they don't experience. So the reality is, how can you drive people closer to experience them? You can share them. You can create media sources. You can inspire them to, in some way, in hopes that in some day they actually see it for themselves and they actually experience it for themselves. And by doing so, that is how you make someone care. That is how you change policy, in my opinion, is that you share what you love and you share what you fear losing most, and you don't be afraid to open your voice about something or to raise your voice about something. And I guess that's the approach that I've taken, is that I never want to be somebody who tells people what to vote for. I just want to advocate for what I love in hopes that they form that same relationship.
I love that. And I love hearing your how aware you are of the policy aspect, because I didn't fully understand that until I started doing this full time, but that's where the big shifts happen. And super cool about how your work has influenced that. And one more question about your photography career.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, you could easily all day, every day, take pictures for these massive companies and make a great living. But one thing that I think is super cool is that all these kind of independent journalism publications that I love, like Surfer's Journal and Outdoor Journal and Modern Huntsman, you contribute work to those folks. And so, obviously you're not doing that to try to put as much money as possible in the bank account. What drives you to work with these little, these smaller organizations that are smaller publications that are doing such important work?
Yeah, it's a funny one, because I realized early on, and maybe this is a marketing ploy, but I realized early on, like, I wanted to get my work in front of as many voices and as many audiences as possible. I made a children's book.
Yeah.
It's my best-selling project I've ever done. Why? Because it got me, Chris Burkard, surf photographer, right, in front of a whole bunch of people who would never have seen my work. And this is one of the great things that you can do for your photography or for your career, is that you can introduce your work into audiences that wouldn't normally see it. Mm-hmm. And that, exactly for that reason, has been why I felt impressed to start working and speaking to audiences, and I jump at that opportunity. I jump at the opportunity to share what I've learned about the world, about life, about traveling with new and interesting people. And I do that not because I necessarily want to do so to make a living, but because I want to connect with those people. And I want to share. I feel like the planet, the earth, nature, the wilderness has given me a great gift. It's given me an education. It's honestly given me everything. I owe my life to it. And so to not be able to, I guess, give something back in a way feels selfish. And I seek out opportunities to do so. And when I have the chance to speak on an issue that really is top of mind, which is conservation, through the means of photography, I feel really empowered. It feels special. It feels important. And that's really, truly where I try to focus my attention. So again, all of these projects, ultimately, The Boy Who Spoke to the Earth, my kids' book, it's not a story about preserving the rainforest. It's about getting kids into nature. And the whole point there is that if you get people into nature, they will want to protect it because they will have formable, coming of age experiences, and they will be able to ultimately feel a connection there. And I've always preached this idea. I'll get off my soapbox in a second here, but I've always preached this idea that, we hear people saying, oh man, that, the national parks are ruined. You go to the rim of the Grand Canyon, there's people with selfie sticks. And I've just never understood. I'm like, the alternative is that those people could be home playing video games. Mm-hmm. What do you prefer? Like, the reality is nature is a gateway drug. Mm-hmm. And their first experience, and I say there because I've been one of those people. I've been one of them, a kid who didn't want to get out of the car at the rim of the Grand Canyon, just wanted to play video games. And I did, and I saw it and I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And you know what? My second trip there, I hiked a little bit. And then the third trip there, I went down to the Colorado, and by God, somehow I became connected to these places. And it was all because of these first initial formidable experiences. And I don't really care if somebody's on the rim taking a selfie, because that is the introduction. And even if they do so because it's going to create some, spike in social media following, great. I think that their next experience might create a more deeper, immersive scenario. And I guess that's just what I hope to empower people to want to do, is create and document accessible adventures in nature.
Yeah, it all goes back to you won't protect what you don't love. And I can think of many of these formative experiences I've had that, when I was a kid or a teenager, that directly led me to where I am in land conservation. I completely agree with that.
Right. Because you weren't born with a freaking fanny pack and a khaki shirt and a wide brim hat and a white beard, and a couple $1,000,000 to be like, oh, well, Edward Abbey,
sure.
That's the beauty of it. It takes all different types, and that's what I love about it.
You're speaking my language, man. And it's hard to believe, but we're coming up on an hour. So I've got a few questions that I like to ask everybody kind of at the end of the podcast, just to compare the answers. So we'll run through those, and then we'll get back to our quarantine lives. So do you have any favorite books? And it could be about the American West, could be about creativity. What books have been influential in your life? Because I saw a video of your office and it looked like you had a good number of books up there.
My book collection is impressive, at least to me. Kevin Fedarko's Emerald Mile.
He's great.
Just such a great book, mainly because it intertwines history with this modern day experience. And I'm very much a student of the American West and sort of the trials and tribulations of the First Nations people, as well as the first settlers, and just what people went through to settle this area and this land. It blows me away. And I think that in many ways, I really am drawn to books about obviously conservation from the perspective of Edward Abbey. He's and a lot of other amazing folks out there. I also love a couple of the not self-help but books, but there's a book called Essentialism by Greg McKeown.
Yes.
Great book on basically learning how to say no to say yes to what you want. And that book has been instrumental in my life. I think Ansel Adams' autobiography has been a really beautiful book. Honestly, any person who is interested in conservation should read that book. It is so on point with how we can use our voice and our time and our talents. And he really built the roadmap for artists becoming conservationists. And the truth of the matter is that people who do their, like, it's hard because there's this conversation between policy and art, and where does like art fit in with this goal of conservation? And people always think like, oh, well, to make a difference, you just need a lot of money, or you need a lot of time, or you need, you be a, philanthropic, blah, blah, blah. But the truth of the matter is that the only reason we have national parks is because of a painter. Not all national parks, but mainly Yosemite in general and others, is because of a painter that went there, painted these things, and sent them back to Washington to be like, this is what is here. That was the first Protection Act that was put. So it was an artist that very first, I'm blanking on the name, sorry, that first went there and created that. And Ansel Adams played a huge role, and John Muir played a huge role, and his work was more within the sciences and whatnot. So I think that the role of artist in conservation has always been intertwined, and it's a really beautiful relationship. So books on that subject, to me, are awesome. I kind of cling to books like that, and I think like any independent like zine, I'm usually a big fan of too.
Yeah, I watched your interview with Chase Jarvis on YouTube, and it was so good. But that guy's recent book, Creative Calling, it was unbelievably good. I just didn't know what to expect. I picked it up at the airport, and man, what a good dude. Y'all are buddies, huh?
He's a good dude, yeah, and he kind of, in many ways, paved the way for like the photographer to kind of go viral and like be sharing. For a lot of times, it was really challenging as a young artist to like get other people to give you advice and give you the time of day, give you anything. And Chase was one of those people who really like allowed for that to become commonplace. Like, hey, I'm going to offer tutorials and wisdom and this and that for how to do these things. And he really helped. He helped me. He's helped a lot of other people in that regard. So yeah, he's an awesome dude.
When you think about the American West and everywhere you've been, I mean, I was watching some of your films, and there was some just unbelievably spectacular work around Monument Valley. I mean, you've been everywhere. What is there one specific spot? You don't have to give away secrets, but one specific spot that you would say is your favorite place in the West?
Oh man, Bears Ears is so critical, awesome. I love Valley of the Gods. I just did a bike ride through there. Canyonlands National Park. Yep. Why? Because Canyonlands is so hard to access. Like, it's so funny. It's that constant theme of like, we talk about national parks as being these crazy touristed places. You hike 10 minutes in any direction and you're going to be alone.
Yep.
You hike 20 minutes in any direction, you're going to be isolated, right? Like, you hike a couple miles, you're in the backcountry. Like, that's the reality. And it's a beautiful scenario where the parks that are hard to access, that have remote areas that allow you to only access by foot, by bike, those are the ones that I really cling to. And I think that Yosemite has a special place in my heart only because it's one of the first places I ever took pictures. The Eastern Sierras too, but I'm a fan of, honestly, like I'm a big fan of exploring your own backyard and seeing what it has to offer. Like all these last couple weekends in quarantine, I've just been going out to places like that are less than an hour from my home and riding my bike through the mountains and seeing cave paintings I've never seen before. And my mind has been more blown in the last 3 months than it has in the last like 2 years because of the fact that these are places I've driven by 1,000 times. I thought that's some podunk town, hole in the wall, nothing's there, I just can't stand it. And then to like really get back and see that spring, see that waterfall, see that, I'm like, this is unreal, and I think that fosters a real beautiful relationship with the landscape that I just don't want to take for granted.
I think that's great advice. It's timely advice, especially given where we are now. But even in non-quarantine times, I think that is That's very, very valuable advice. So last question, the people who listen to this podcast, they love the West, and I have a pretty diverse set of folks on here. So it could be artists, could be entrepreneurs who are doing things, ranchers, conservationists, the full gamut. And do you have any parting words or words of wisdom from all your experiences that you'd like to leave with the listeners as we sign off here?
I would say, I had this conversation. I'm sure you're a fan of Paul Nicklin. He's been a real, as a conservationist and as a photographer, he's been a real person I've looked up to. And I did this gallery show with him in New York years ago, and we had this discussion with all these people there. And he brought up this really interesting point. He said, people were asking about conservation and what the best step is in terms of protecting these places. And he said, in a place like Antarctica, where he's put in so much time and so much energy to protect it, he was like, the answer for Antarctica is not to have constant cruise ships, entering these pristine bays. It's for people to see it. He said it's about the right people going there. And what does that mean? Does the right people mean the people who are willing to foot the bill, people who are wealthy? No, it means people who are willing to go and raise their voice and say something about the experience and share it and give a place and a face and a name to these places. And I think it's the same issue everywhere. Like, I strive to be a better traveler and not a better tourist. I want to be someone that leaves a place with a better understanding of what issues they're facing and how I can play a role in advancing the protection of those places. And if you go, like, who are you traveling with? Where is that money going to? Are they a sustainable, responsible company? Am I educated and learning about what issues these places are facing so that I can speak to people about it, whether on social or whether on the dinner table? Again, like, we have a sphere of influence, whether that's just your own family or whether it's millions of people. I can testify that will make a difference. I started my career sharing images around my dinner table with my mom, who never traveled anywhere and gave me the opportunity to do so much. And I feel like nowadays I have this incredible audience that I can share ideas with. And I want people to understand that when they share what they love, and they share what they fear losing most, they're advocating for these wild places.
Man, that is perfect. You're the man. I really appreciate you doing this. I appreciate you being so open and sharing all this wisdom you've accumulated.
Appreciate you taking the time to let me chat, man.
Yeah, man, definitely. Well, thank you very much. Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast, and thanks for listening to that particular episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Before you go, I've got 3 quick things. Number 1, if you like the podcast, please do me a huge favor. Either pass it along to a friend who may be interested, share it on your social media, or go to iTunes and give it a 5-star review. All those things would mean a lot to me, and they would really help to spread the word about the podcast. Number 2, if you've listened to many of these episodes, you know that I love reading and I love talking about books. Every other month, I send out a quick email with a few books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The subjects are varied, but they're pretty much all nonfiction with an emphasis on history, biographies, adventure narratives, and topics related to the American West. There are no sales pitches for ranches, no spam, no other kind of nonsense, just books. So if you'd like to sign up for the list, head to Mountain and Prairie/reading, or just go to Mountain and Prairie and there's a massive tab at the top that says book recommendations. Click on it. There are a ton of good books that I've read. Some of the old email lists are on there. You can go crazy. There are a lot of books. And finally, if you know anyone I should interview for the podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. All my contact info is at mountainandprairie.com, and I'm on all the social media stuff, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to have some recommendations and suggestions of interesting people I should meet. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.